I told myself never to act like that again. I did let myself down that day, big time, and I knew it. We return to a point which was first discussed in the opening chapter, my time in karting. After a disastrous 2006 season, some changes had to be made and some changes were made. These changes will ultimately define the rest of my karting career. 2007 saw a much needed and overdue team change. After the previous season left me frustrated. Educational problems, the environment I was in, mechanical issues, chassis issues, you name it, it happened. It wasn't a healthy combo. The team chosen was Results Racing, a newly found team set up by some of the previous employees of ARC Chassis, which was also the name of the chassis I was using at the time. It was a step up from what I previously experienced. It was all about rediscovering myself, and that took time. New team, mechanics, and drivers who were experienced figures in national and club karting. I probably had the worst first meeting that anyone could have had. I didn't finish a race. Aside from that, I did feel comfortable with the choice. I knew I had to step up in order to keep my end of the deal. My mechanic Lewis helped me be comfortable, which allowed me to drive the kart and be able to say any setup changes if and when needed. I wasn't quick and my racecraft was lacking, not helped unfortunately with the chassis which had lost its spark. Suffered a couple of injuries as well for good measure. I had my wrist driven over in July, which was the first meeting that Wilton used the international layout, which caused a sprain. I didn't realise until a couple of hours later that happened. So much for adrenaline. Adrenaline keeps the pain away until it wears down, and then you're thinking, this hurts a bit. Yeah, that did happen. A change of chassis in the final round yielded encouraging improvements, even if results didn't show. I had switched from ARC to Attroney kart for the reasons which I've already stated. The chassis wasn't that good, it was being left behind, and Attroney kart was seen as the next big thing. 2008 would see me continue with the Attroney kart chassis, me staying with the team, now rebranded as KR Sport, which was in its first season, focusing on TKM and with one cadet runner. The positive change at the end of last season with the chassis wasn't a fluke, and event by event I moved closer to the front. I was at this stage in the mid-pack. At times though, I could be my own worst enemy. The TKM Festival, which was being held at Wilton Mill instead of its usual home in Bolton because of dispute regarding running days, was one example. I had an incident in the Elite Pre-Final, which in itself was the first time I ever made it to that point. Got another driver into trouble without reason, and the confidence just snowballed. I even got taken out at the start of the final, which meant I was only 17th. Yeah, you can definitely guess why that happened. Between that and then, I had 3 trophies on the bounce in May, June and July, even if they were only for 7th and 8th, but it just showed how many competitors were racing that day. September and August I went the wrong way on the setup and I was just driving terribly, as a consequence of what happened at the TKM Festival. October I was back on the pace as shown in practice, but there were still issues that needed to be resolved, mainly my mentality, which is difficult at the best of times. Some things never change, do they? Still, I learnt a lot that year, and the lessons learned were to be carried into the 2009 season. I ended up 5th in the TKM Extreme Wilton Mill Club Championship, which in itself was the first time in 3 years I ended up in that position. My last year as a juniors. Same result. After the switching and sliding of mechanics throughout 2008, 2009 would see me permanently partnered with Lewis unless Super 1 National Championship clashes were happening. At that point, Super 1 takes priority. 2009 began quietly. I was still on the clutch engine in the first event, but I still managed to take 5th and my first trophy since July the previous year. It was also my best result I managed in the category in a final, so progress was indeed being made. The following month, March, saw me reunited with the direct drive engine for the first time since my team debut in 2007. I believe that was the February or January meeting, I don't remember which one. Either way, it happened around about that period. Beforehand, I was on the clutch version, which allowed me to recover quickly if I spun, but I had no engine braking. Also, if it somehow stopped, I couldn't restart it. Direct drive is without the clutch, which allows engine braking at the expense of if you spin or go off a track and you stop, you have to get the car back on the track, lift it up. Right, you lift it up like that and then push along to push start. Yeah, not good. The first session I had on it, somehow or another, it just all came together. It clicked. I did an exceptionally fast lap near the end of the session. Enough to say bloody hell inside the helmet. And then I went even faster on the very next lap. I was in the low 49s at that point, and then suddenly the last two laps went 48.5 into 48.4, which at the time was lap record pace. Say that as you will. Sunday proved that the pace was no fluke. I had at the time the best results I'd ever done in TKM Extreme. I almost said TKM Festival there for a minute. That was not a good idea. That comes a little bit later. I had been the fastest I'd ever been around the track, and I was second in the final on merit. Me and the team were properly buzzing after that event, as that was the last piece of the puzzle to get me towards the front. The April event promised much, but a mixture of brake issues and bad driving meant I was at the back of the grid for the final. In the first heat, I got caught up in the first lap incident, but still made it back to third, even if one of the drivers called me something which I'm not allowed to mention here. To be honest, to this day, I still don't know why. Maybe it was because I shut the door and then when I was allowed to, but I don't know. Because of my mishaps in the other two heats, I was at the back of the grid and I struggled to get towards the front. A fortunate red flag, because somebody had crashed and fell out the car at a crook, gave me a vital chance to reset myself. Ash, who is the team manager and still is the team manager, he's also the owner of the team, was my mechanic for the weekend, as I was the only KR driver racing. He'd done one day in 07 for the same principle, but wasn't able to do the Sunday event, so was unable to do Sunday because of work commitments. The two of us got on well, which does help a lot actually. He helped me get my mind straight for the restart. I then ended up fighting back to 6th. That became 5th after the second place driver got excluded from the race results for being underweight. The TKM Extreme weight at the time for the combined kart and driver was 148 kilograms minimum, and unfortunately for second place he was underneath it. So that meant another trophy for 5th and a fortunate salvage job. May was a clash with the Larcour Super 1, and I just went the wrong way on the setup after the first heat, which meant I could only manage 3rd for the final. Still a decent result. June was better, and it was another clash with Clay Pigeon at the Super 1, which meant Lewis was once again called down. Won a heat for the first time. I set the fastest lap in all 3 of the TKM Extreme heats that day, and I had a close battle for first, ultimately just missing out by about a third of a second. I was definitely getting closer, and that meeting proved it. July was a lesson in race car humility. Qualifying was a myriad of problems, and that meant I had to start at the very back of the grid. Somehow or another got it back to 4th, even with a questionable start, but after that the driving was good. Heat 2, which was on Sunday, was a racecraft lesson. I couldn't find a way past the leader and at the time my championship rival, and I still hadn't got past him by the end of the final lap, and I was trying every which way, but unfortunately I left the door open and I got swamped. Yeah, not good and not a good idea. The third heat was quiet, but I was quick. I ended up 3rd. A cross-threaded wheel nut in the final meant it was over before it began, and I felt something instantly was wrong while I was going through the top part of the corner, and I almost went flying off the track. Initially thought the wheel was loose, but as it turned out it was cross-threaded, and there's not a lot you can do once you find out it's cross-threaded. The threads weren't going in on themselves, they were going against each other, which is why it's called cross-threaded. What happened afterwards is a moment which I'd rather forget. I took the tyre, took it to the team, and yeah, exploded. looking back at it, it was pretty damn well embarrassing. God, I was embarrassing myself that day. Once I was calm, I was fine and reflective. I told myself never to act like that again. I did let myself down that day, big time, and I knew it. 2 weeks later was the annual TKM festival, and after having time to reflect on what happened 2 weeks earlier, I was a much calmer driver and had a point to prove. I was also reunited with Lewis for the rest of the season. No more Super 1 commitments, and he could stay with me for the rest of the year. Practice was fine aside from the first session, which was wet, which became academic because it was dry for the whole weekend, and then the final session where I suffered a snapped stub bearing, typically after I set my fastest lap of the day. The 09 Tony kart always seemed to have a problem with the stub axles that year, but nobody knows why. Maybe it was just a bit too early used, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just speculating at that point. No point speculating on it. All I know is that the stub bearing broke in the final session. Fortunately, it was a fixable problem. Qualifying on Saturday saw me get second overall again. Last year was a last lap banzai. This year it was early, and I held the top spot in the session right up until the final lap, where my teammate James took it. Right at the very end, which annoyed me. I was a bit annoyed by that, but oh well, it'd be like that sometimes. So yeah, the Chaos Sport drivers, which was me, James and David, we filled out 3 of the top 4 places, which were the places for the front rows, because it was a group versus group format, A versus B versus C versus D. And I would be starting on the front row for all 3 of my heats. I had a second and a third in the Saturday heats, which meant it was a good baseline for Sunday. Although I was quite fortunate in a way in the first heat because I was misguided into the pit lane. I was supposed to have gone to the weighbridge, but I wasn't directed, which did annoy a lot of people. But I can't exactly do much if the officials have told me to go that way. So you see where the debate comes from. And then third in the second heat afterwards, which was a close affair at the front. Sunday started badly with a spin and a crash when the door was shut on me unfairly, and my own teammate crashed into me. I did get going again and got fastest lap in the process, but that was no consolation. As it turned out, the teammate in question, David, was fighting for the British Championship that year, and the crash wrote the chassis off. Yeah, that's quite awkward, isn't it? It did lead to a somewhat charged moment with his dad afterwards in the awning after we got back, which was disheartening for me because I felt I was being misblamed for the incident. The rest of the team actually sided with me on this one because for what they saw, the move was on. I had done enough to warrant the right for space, but I was not given it. The only reason I spun was because I was trying to avoid crashing. It was agreed that the door had been unfairly shut on me. He did later apologise after he calmed, but realistically the damage had already been done. The chassis was broken, yes, but he was fortunate to get a spare one for the finals, which did take some of the blushes away from me actually, to be honest. Because of what happened in the third heat, I had to start 16th for the elite final. For the second year in a row I was in the elite final. Yeah, I don't really remember what happened in that race. All I know is that I made some good progress throughout, kept my nose clean, and got myself a top 10. I did finish 10th, which at the time was my best finish in the elite pre-final. I didn't exactly have the best of starts in the main final. It got dragged to the outside around Ashby and got taken off the track a little bit, which dropped me down to 16th. Once that happened though, I was able to keep my nose clean, take advantage of others, made some good moves, which included a clean move on the third heat driver that caused the collision in the first place. Did it cleanly. There was a bit of contact, but that was only after I had got ahead of him. I was enough up the inside. I was like, nope, you are not doing that to me this time. Ended up getting 9th, which was a top 10 finish. Third fastest lap, which was also the fastest Tony kart lap. So, aside from the third heat, that was a good weekend. Although I did have an embarrassing moment when I ran into my own teammate on the slow me down lap because I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. Yeah, that was embarrassing, definitely, but that didn't take away from the fact I finished in 9th. Anyway, now, The tone was set for the rest of the season. Finally taking that first final win in August, and I had a near perfect weekend in September, the only blip being a third place in the second heat. Both times I was fastest driver of the weekend. There was a small change on the Wilton Mill circuit. There was a new bit of tarmac which had been put down after Chapman, which meant that you no longer had to go around an awkward curb. You could now ride the curb, which actually reduced the lap times pretty quickly. October was a bumpy event, which was I had stubborn drivers. I had a puncher in the third heat through nobody's fault. Someone lost a chain and we got caught up in the middle. I lost the tyre. It punctured on me. So yeah, no one survived for that. And then I had the wise idea of trying to continue on it. It was completely flat and I went flying off at the next braking zone. Yeah, great, wonderful, good idea. Yeah, terrible idea really, wasn't it? And then in the final, stubbornness got the better of me. Pressure got the better of me. Yes, I was still third, but I was a long way behind and my championship rival won the race. So yeah, that wasn't a particularly good weekend looking back at it. The following weekend was the GP plate at PF International, the first time I'd been there in 7 years. It was a last minute entry and it showed. A character building one. And an incident in the final I was misblamed for meant I got black flag for the only time in my karting career. The team knew it wasn't me. A lot of the others knew it wasn't me, but the clerk of the course at the time thought it was me and black flagged me. I was a bit seething when I was told that because I knew damn well I was on the brake pedal until I didn't brake. Who's the fool, eh? Who's the fool then? It certainly wasn't me. Anyway, that started my distrust in the clerking decisions that remained with me for the rest of my time in karting. It's amazing what happens when one stubborn individual can blacken the whole group, I guess. 3 weeks later, I had time to reflect on what happened, and a lot of the drivers knew that it wasn't me, so at least I had that in mind. Wilton Mill for the final club round. It was really consolidating second because I knew first place was out of sight now. It was also proving to those around me and myself that what happened 3 weeks earlier was just a mishap. And I did. First heat I won in mixed conditions. I was on slicks, which wasn't actually the faster tyre. The wet tyre was, but I got the lead and I stayed there and I kept myself consistent and I kept myself safe. Didn't fly off the track once. So won that one. Second heat I got pushed off unintentionally by another driver. Kept it going and ended up 9th. I was quick in that heat. It was just a shame about what happened. Third heat I just wasn't on the pace, but I still got third, which meant I was second on the grid for the final. The pole guy had a second place in comparison to my 9th. We both had the same results in the other 2 heats, a first and a third. It was also the last Wilton final on the current regulations, as changes will be made the following year, but more on that later. At the start of the final, going through Oblivion Crook, it was fine. I still held on to second. And then I listened to the advice from July not to go around the outside when I didn't need to. And ironically, the one who gave it to me didn't follow said advice. He went for the outside of Christmas on lap 1 after thinking he had successfully defended for me. As I saw that happen, I decided to take the inside line instead. In order for me to get that right, I had to hook the kart perfectly on the curb. So that means putting both my right side tyres on the inside of the curb to a point where it will pull me around without it puncturing. And I did. It threw me around, made sure I kept it straight, and I got the lead for it. After that, I wasn't headed. Went on to extend the gap quite significantly throughout that final. And Ashby, every time I was coming out of Ashby, I could always look to the right hand side because that's where the track was. And if a kart was moving further away from the braking zone, I knew I was pulling a gap. I did have a brief scare on the final lap though when I was coming up to lap drivers who almost ran into me at Ashby. But beyond that, the race was never in doubt. I won by the biggest margin of the meeting in the finals, which was around about 6 seconds, which was pretty good going. Normally, Wet races are a bit of a struggle, but that one, absolutely spot on. Nobody was stopping me that day. My value as a racer went up exponentially as a result of my results that year. All it took was a change of belief and an engine affectionately known as the Devil. Its serial number being BT6664. You can definitely see why it's called the Devil. If you haven't, just look at the numbers. So I took second at the Wilton Championship in TKM Extreme, the April meeting being a contributing factor as to why I didn't win. July, you could argue, yes, but ultimately it was that April event that was the main factor because I didn't drive as well as I should have done and got the results which I needed. There we go. Swings with roundabouts, I did learn a lot that year. 2009 was a game changer as I was now considered a consistent front runner at Wilton Mill and could now take it to the national level drivers. Hey, a nice change I believe. The team was behind me and there were bigger and better things to come. 2010 will see the biggest changes to the regulations for the TKM 2-stroke classes along with a minor change for a junior 4-stroke. The team expanded. A year of change was on the horizon, on the racing and personal front. It all began with, but I won't say any more or I'll spoil the next chapter.